Now we're going to get into the final routing and shaping of the body. First thing we're going to do is we're going to route out the neck pocket. So I have a template here that I use for my routing, and it's got some guidelines on it that get me pretty darn close to being perfect. If I, line this little mark here with the center line on my body and do the same thing on the other side, then I'm almost there. So what I like to do, just to verify, because I have goofed this up in the past, is I use a laser to make sure that everything lines up all the way through. First thing I do is, I've got my template in place. The laser is centered on the center line of the body blank here. And that gives us, confidence that, okay, so if the laser continues on and it finds everything is straight, then we should align with our body blank. On the neck, I've got a line here. That's the center line of this end. I've got a line here. These are probably pretty faint, hard to see against the ebony. That's the center line on the far end. I drop this in my template. Notice I have the body clamped to the table because I don't want it to shift around. If I need to adjust the laser, I will do that because I'm much less likely to bump that than I am the body while checking things out. And then I've got the neck here settled on something that's exactly the same height as the body, so it's not twisting or anything like that. I take my little guide, and then I see that the far end of my neck lines up, and this end of my neck lines up. So I now know that everything is aligned all the way through. This is a body blanket that if there was a little bit off, like, a thousandth here and there, a few thousandths here and there, it's not such of a big deal. So this is about as far as I go. I have built some guitars where sort of the center of the body is continued on through the neck. Not neck through body guitars, but the same stripe that goes down the center of the neck also goes down the center of the body. And in those cases, I get even more particular. I'll usually, loosely put on the body, the guide here. I will clamp the neck to the body and then make sure that all those lines are 100% perfect before taping down the template permanently, or not permanently, but to make my cut. So this one's good. What we're going to do now is we're going to go over to the drill press, and we'll use a Forstner bit to hog out a big chunk of this, and then we will finish up the rest of it with the hand router. So to hog this out, we're going to basically run this down to a little under 5/8 is the depth that we want, but we don't want to take this all the way down. This doesn't leave a very clean cut. So there's a little bit of a tip on here. We also don't want little, conical sections here where we've just got the tip. So just bring it down to the surface and then set our depth gauge for about a 1/2 inch after that, and we'll get the bulk of what we need taken out of there. So we got the first router bit I want to use loaded up in here. This thing's pretty big, like it's not going to do these tight corners, but I do like to use the larger bit first. It kind of leaves a little bit better surface, and I'll go like all the way to the 5/8 inch depth with this, and then I'll come back with a smaller bit to get those corners. As always, we're going to kind of sneak up on our cut so that we get nice clean cuts and try not to tear out too much at the same time. So we are going to take something that's got the depth. So we got a 3/4 inch cutting surface that can get into our corners. And what we want to do is bottom it out in the surface that's already there. So just kind of let it, use the fine adjustment to get the depth. And when you start feeling some resistance, back it off just a little bit. And that should be pretty darn close. We may have to do a little bit of fine adjustment if we find that we're leaving a little bit in there. And we got our nice corners. And it looks like it is perfect. After I've routed my pockets, I do like to sort of double check the fit of the neck. Make sure that my laser still thinks that I'm all straight. If you've really messed it up, there is usually some wiggle room where you can maybe sand a little bit on this side and crank it to this direction a little bit. If you had something that was more solid colored, there's always the option of sort of gluing in a shim. I've done this in the past, and match the wood so that I can maybe twist it this direction a little bit. I've done several of these tricks in the past. This one appears to be dead on, so we're all good. Thing horrible to have to fix, which would be really good because this burl would not hide it very well at all. Now the neck pocket is done. We're going to go ahead and sort of address the back of the base. So we're going to go ahead and put a little round over on it. We're going to cut out do a belly cut. We're going to put a little bit of the taper on the back of the neck, but actually that's probably going to have an intermediate step where we drill the holes for the neck and we also add, like recesses for the ferrules. This is going to get a recess too for the control cavity cover. Right now it's 1/4 inch round over. It's not at full height yet. I will slowly work into it. We'll use all our best practices. We're going to cut downhill and we're going to ease into the cut so that we don't end up with any tear out. Okay, for this last little bit, we're getting pretty close here, but what I don't want to do is bring this up so much that I have like a little notch there. So we're going to use a little bit of test wood, so hard to show on the camera. But right now, it's a little too high. As I'm coming across, I'm actually catching on the edge of that router bit. So we do want to drop it just a hair. And now we're going, yes, against the blade, the cutting surface. We'll do a quick test cut with our scrap wood and then get back to the body itself. We do actually have just a little bit of the edge of that blade coming in there, but it is so tiny that that's going to sand out like with nothing. So this is probably exactly where I want to be. It's going to end up with a nice round over with just a hair bit of sanding that we would be putting in anyways to feather in that edge. So we are in a good place. There's some, let's have some debris or something on here. I probably need to make another pass of cleaning up this table. I am getting a little bit of scuffs on the back side of this body. Now it's nothing that won't get cleaned out when I sand and wet sand, but I think I probably need to make a pass at my table here and see if I've got a burr or something sticking up. So I've marked off in the body here where I want to hog out the bulk of the belly cut. I used to do this on a belt sander, but that makes a total mess. Now I'll do it on a spindle sander that's really good about capturing most of the dust. And then I will clean that up with the palm sander or orbital sander later when I do most of the sanding on the body. It's pretty dirty, so before I actually touch the body, I am going to clean it up with the rubber sandpaper cleaner. This is pretty much roughly what I want. Again, this is, this is sort of a very coarse way to do this, so the rest of it I will do, with a smaller tool. Now we're going to do our control cavity recess. So we've already routed out our control cavity because that was a whole lot easier before the top was on. But the recess is going to go here. We're going to go down about 1/8 of an inch. This is not one of those things that I have a very precise layout for. I just kind of eyeball it as I'm, putting things together, because some of that will shift. Like, for example, we had that tear out here on the profile, and I reprofiled it a little bit, so I may, in this case, get a little bit farther away from the edge than I would normally. Really, the only thing that's much of a concern is we want to be able to drop this. This is our template for the cover in, and these holes should be in a good place so that the magnets I put in the cover will snap to the magnets on the body. So we want to make sure that we end up with magnets, in decent positions, like I don't want to shift this over so much that I'm, got a magnet sticking halfway out here. But there's quite a bit of forgiveness in this. So I'm going to kind of lay it out here, sort of eyeball the top here to, that I'm fairly even across the top, and just run a little pencil, if I can find one that's actually got some lead in it, around there, so I can pull it off, take a look, and see that that is where I want things to go. Yes, and so that will look pretty good. So we're not, we're a ways away from our roundover. We aren't going to end up with any kind of weird stuff going on there. And let's put our template here, and let's just see, where our magnets are going to lay. We got here, here, and here. Plenty of space for those. So I think we're in good shape. We probably could shift a little bit this way, but it's fine as is. So now I will go ahead and tape that and line that back up with what I drew out here, and then we will make our cut using just, a bog standard template router bit. So we've got our nice recess here. You'll notice I did route a little bit outside the lines. That was intentional. Once I sort of thought through it a few more seconds, I decided to shift the pocket just a hair in that direction. So that gives us a little bit of more play with this one screw, and then I felt this one was a little bit too far over. So we're good now. Now we can take this template, we kind of snap that guy in there. We're going to take a Forstner bit and put in like a 1/16 inch recess here so that we can glue in the magnets to keep the cover on. So now we're going to do our magnet recesses. Now this is kind of basically the same thing I did in the Revisiting Serial number 3 video. We're going to bottom out our bit here on the cutting surface, not on the tip. Set our depth gauge, and then just notch it up a 1/16. And that should give us the hole that we want. We may adjust it a little bit. We'll go get a couple of magnets, sort of the test fit. And we'll just get a couple of these magnets here. Make sure that we are perfect. Now while we're over here at the drill press, we're going to go ahead and drill sort of the guide holes that I do for the screws. These aren't actually at size yet for the screws, but what I do is I run a 1/8 all the way through. And then I'm going to come back and centered on those, I'm going to use a 14 millimeter Forstner bit to do the recesses for the ferrules. That'll also give me the line of where I want to bevel this, and then ultimately when I go and mount the neck, the screws I use aren't, a 1/8 inch shaft, so I will open that up a little bit so that those screws can go through there easily. But this gets me started and shows me where I'm going to be drilling everything. So let's go ahead and just bore those through. We want to make sure that we've got a good chunk of scrap in the back. We are going to, there will be a clean out of what's back there, so the tear out is not so bad, but just good practice. And here's the holes in our back. So now we're going to flip this over and do the recesses for our ferrules. Okay, I misspoke a little bit earlier. It's actually 15 millimeter. Double check all your measurements before you start these kinds of things. So we're going to go ahead and we want to basically go in depth a little bit more than this, because we are going to sand a bit, and also I don't want these sticking up above the surface. I would much rather them be slightly deeper than slightly higher. So to set the depth, let's use the material itself. So we're going to bottom out here, and then we want our depth gauge to be this thickness. And that should get us where we want to be. Now, my old eyes, I kind of need to get pretty close to make sure that I am centered on the hole. There's probably a better way of doing this, but so far I've been successful, so this is what I do. Finally, these two, because what we're going to do is we're going to come back and bevel this. We need them to be a little bit deeper. So we're just gonna notch that up a 1/16 just to make sure that we have a space to guide us. And eventually we will come back and figure out exactly what depth we need. But we don't want to erase the hole that we have with the bevel and then have, it be a lot harder to get back where we need to be. And then finally for the back, we're going to put a little bevel. We're going to start from about, kind of want to make it even on the back of these two, and then just sort of taper that off, maybe 3/16 or so that there's just a little bit more comfort there. We're not going to do anything fancy. We're just going to burn it off a little bit. And then when we do our fine sanding, we'll kind of clean up that radius and make that pretty again. But right now, we're just getting the rough shape. And then we'll go back to the drill press and make these probably a little bit deeper so that the ferrules come, just below the new surface. Got the bevel as far as we want it to go. And you can see like the 1/4 inch roundover actually just got completely replaced. So we basically came down about a 1/4 inch, maybe a little bit more. If we hadn't dug these out previously, then we might have lost this lip. So that's kind of why I went an extra notch when I did these. And now we'll take them down to a height so that the ferrules will fit at the front of this taper nice and flush. So now we're really starting to look like a guitar or a bass. But let's route out those front cavities here. So we need to get into the pickups. We're going to this is going to be like a PJ set. We're going to do the P set first. I've got my line about where I want it along the face, and then I've got lines on the template itself that line up with the center line, and that looks nice and straight. The center line on this is visible pretty good in a lot of places. In some places it just kind of disappears. So make sure that is all something that you can see, and we'll get to working on this. So what we're going to do here is we are going to use a 1/2 inch bit to do the bulk of this. But these corners need a tighter radius. So once we've drilled out the bulk of this, well, first we're going to go in here with some Forstner bits and get a lot of this out. But once we've got the bulk of it out with the 1/2 inch bit, then we'll come along behind and use a 1/4 inch radius bit on just these corners. So there's like 6 little spots, and that will get us a nice reveal for our pickup. As you can see, these corners, they're not tight enough to fit in here, so we'll now switch over to a much smaller bit to get those tighter corners. This guy here, 1/8 inch radius, he'll get in those tight corners, but he's a very delicate bit, so we don't want to really have him doing a whole lot of work. So we'll just do those corners, and we'll do about half the depth at a time. Now we get a nice tight radius on that. We drop these pickups in here. So this is the way. They slide down in there nicely. Yeah, nice, perfect. Okay, and you can see the channel, tilt this, that we routed before the top was on for our wiring. So that all came together too. So the next template we're going to use is for the jazz bass. Now this one's a little bit more of a pain. It's actually 2 steps. So the radius on the jazz bass pickups is not something convenient like a 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch. Where the screw holes are, we can use a nice 1/2 inch, but these corners, what they really want is a 3/16. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to do this in 2 steps. We've got a jig here. We will center that, and that is going to have these 4 holes here. We will use a 3/16 inch Forstner bit, actually a brad tip bit, to drill those holes. So that should give us a nice clean 3/16 radius at that spot. Then we're going to drop some pins in there. And then we'll lay this template down over top the pins, which should hold it in the exact right position because it'll be pushing against these 4 corners. And then we'll go in with a 1/2 inch bit to get the rest of that. We might have to go in with that 1/4 inch guy just in the corners because we're going to have we're going to have a half, like a 3/16 inch radius and then a 1/2 inch radius. They're going to come together. There's probably going to be just a little bit of a bump out towards the ends of that. So we might clean that up with the other bit. This is a 3/16 inch brad tip bit. So I like the brad tips. If they don't, there's usually sort of a flatter area around it, and so they don't kind of tear so much as scrape. So if you're trying to get a nice clean corner like the router bit is doing here, this is going to give you a cleaner corner than if you were just using sort of an old-fashioned twist bit. Now I've already set the depth. We're basically going to line up in these holes, make sure we are against the edge. I did put a block in here to try and keep that, centered as best as I can, but for the most part, we just want to make sure that we're pushing against the edge of the template. And let's go at it. We pulled that template off, and we've got our 4 nice radiuses here. We can drop some pins in here, and they all look pretty good, except for this guy. So I think I might have been bending the drill bit a little bit. I don't think it's going to matter, because really what we care about is for this pin is that it is got a nice, it holds our template snug here. So if this is tapering in like this, when we go in with the pickup, we can actually sort of chisel that out or clean that out a little bit so that it's not keeping the pickup from dropping in there. But this looks like it's going to do exactly what I wanted to do. I did do a dry fit, got the tape ready, and just slide this over the pins. And then it brings that second template down exactly where we need to be. So now we can just take our 1/2 inch and route out the channel here. Pull our pins because we're taped and we're in place. And then do our traditional, let's hog out some of this with a Forstner bit first. Okay, so we've done the bulk of it. As I kind of mentioned, there's a little bit of sort of places where the radius doesn't quite match. I've seen people with this style of jig go at it with a chisel now, but I would be afraid that to maybe go and cut into the radius that way. So I think I am going to try and do this with that 1/4 inch bit. It should get farther in obviously than the 1/2 inch will, but it won't go as tight as that 3/16. So we should get a nicer transition there. Let's try that. It'll be an experiment. Now that pin that had gone wonky, I can actually see what happened now that I've opened everything up. And what it did is it hit the 2 channels that I had routed for wiring and sort of went zoop and twisted away from running true. So that is probably something that I should think about when I do this again. I try and keep those channels away from any of these corners so that I've got plenty of wood for that to just dig through versus getting pulled into an open space. Before we pull things off, we'll just take our jazz pickup and drop him in there. Oh yeah, and he settles in there nicely. Off with the template, and that looks really good. So there are slight disconnects on the radius here, but once we've hit it with a little bit of sandpaper to kind of take off that sharp edge, I think this will look just fine. Now what we want to do is lay out where our bridge is going to be. So I've done enough of these bases. My same basic design, no matter what the body shape is, kind of leads me to the same geometry that I want to be about 36 1/8 to the back of this particular bridge. I've had situations in the past where vendors have changed specifications and measurements on stuff. So same model number, but it's not really the same thing. So I do double check every time I have one of these. And so what I've done is I've run the treble side like all the way towards the neck and the bass side all the way away from the neck. And then I want to kind of check my scale. And 34 inches, I've got sort of, I'm in the middle of that, leaning more towards the treble side. So I've got plenty of adjustment here to make sure that I stay in tune at the 12th fret and my intonation is nice and all that kind of stuff. So there's also a little bit more adjustment for this particular bridge in the box. There are shorter screws and smaller springs, so you can even pull the bass back even a little bit further than that. So that looks all good. I'm happy with that. So now it's just a matter of let's make sure that we're all square. So we'll just take a nice square here. We're aligned on the center line with that middle screw. We are, I think, exactly where we want to be. Draw in our screw holes, and then we will drill those out. All right, we have our holes drilled for our bridge. The next thing we want to do is expose the channel for the ground wire. So when I originally routed that spot for the ground wire, I did use this paper template. So my end lines are here and here. When we run that against our center line, we are about 2 1/16 off the end of the body. So that puts us about here. So pretty much along this line here anywhere, we should be able to drill through the cap and find our line. Now I did reprofile this, so there's a chance that that math doesn't add up anymore. So what I did do is I went to the back here, and I can see where that channel is. Theoretically, this is aligned with the center line. So we can kind of go there, rerun this, and I did measure that, and 2 1/16 is exactly where we should be. So we're going to go over to the drill press and we'll open that up. Hopefully our math is correct. And I didn't show the drilling on camera because that's kind of boring, but we hit dead on. Perfect. Exactly what I was hoping for. Now we want to drill the holes for the controls to come in from the control cavity. So I've used my template, laid it out here, just basically made some pencil marks where I am going to end up with knobs. Now, I did reprofile this a little bit, so this is maybe a 3/16 in from where it was. I want to kind of eyeball it. Does the aesthetic still work? So in the original design, I actually am, you know, a fixed distance in from the perpendicular of the surface. So this is actually a little bit closer to the edge than in the paper design. I have some flexibility there. I could shift this knob just a little bit if it bothers me, and I'm not sure it does. I might smooth this a little bit more, like bring the curve in, like cut off just a hair here, and I think that might be a way to kind of make that more aesthetic to me. I think we're going to go ahead and drill the holes where they are, and I think that will be just fine. Got my holes drilled where I wanted them. I'm actually pretty happy with sort of the way that lays out. I've got everything in here so I could visually just see how this is, and definitely does expose that I probably need to shave a little bit more off on that reprofile to make this curve a little nicer. It kind of comes in and then pops out a bit. So it's not going to be much. I'll probably just do this with, you know, like a sanding block and some 100 grit stuff just to kind of take that profile down a little bit more. I really only, I'm not even sure this is a 16th. This is probably more like a, you know, just barely over a 32nd there, but it'll make that curve a little bit nicer. Also starting to come together, looking really nice. So the last thing we'll do here, or last couple things we're going to do here, I'm going to reprofile that. I'm not going to do that on camera. That's kind of boring. That's just me with a hand sander. We will round this over a little bit to get that nice and smooth, and then we're going to drill the jack hole. So now it's time to do our jack. Now, the jack is one of those things that I am probably least happy with my technique, and it's maybe more about this particular drill press. So I like to use the Switchcraft barrel jacks for my bases, and I've tried cheaper ones, and you know, there's always either connection problems or anything like that. So these things are expensive, but they're totally worth it. So what I end up doing is I've got a Forstner bit. I'm going to recess a little bit for this cap, and then I'm going to drill the rest of it out for the width of the barrel, and you know, I'll try and hold a block here so I don't get any tear out. The real problem is doing this turn here. So my drill press doesn't have a positive stop on that 90 degree, you know, if you turn the table 90 degrees. So I've got a mark, it's pretty close. There's always finagling and jiggling around to try and get this thing so that we're straight like this, and we're on the dot that I want to be at. It's just, there's got to be a better way. And maybe it's a different drill press. I need to kind of probably give that some thought. The outcome is just fine. I just feel that there's too much flexibility for error in it, and so that kind of bothers me. All right, now we're getting a little bit closer towards busting out. We're just going to take a little block of wood and clamp it in here. See if we can help avoid any ugly tear out inside the pocket. And just a little bit of chipping. Kind of, I think, is unavoidable. with the angle that we're coming in at, we're sort of pushing against like an angled chunk of the grain. And so we end up pushing out there. Usually the washer will cover it, so I'm not too worried about it. And for a final cut of this video, we're going to go ahead and do a little round over on the top. So this is going to be pretty tight. It's like a 1/16 radius round over bit. It's pretty small. It's just going to be, you know, to take the sharp edges off, and of course once we sand, that radius is going to change a little bit, but that kind of gives us a good guideline to go. And we'll bring it in, and we'll kind of stop a little bit before we get to the neck pocket, and then by hand I'll sand in and sort of blend that together. If you know, for a base where I've done a arm rest cut, then, you know, I would probably also stop, you know, about here and here, and then finish all that up by hand. But we don't have to worry about that. I did clean up the router table. I was getting some scuffs when I was doing the round over for the bottom, and I did find like a stuck piece of sawdust over here that I think was causing the problem. But ran over, re-smoothed it, make sure that I don't have any sharp edges. So I think we're good, but we're going to kind of keep an eye on that too. And before we do the real cut, of course, we are going to run through a little test blank here just to make sure that we're not about to do something really destructive. And it might be hard to pick this up on the camera, but that's exactly what I was looking for, just to soften that edge a little bit so that we don't have a sharp, but soften it in a nice consistent way versus me hand sanding it. Alright, so we're wrapping up for this video. This is basically what one of my body blanks looks like when all the holes are cut. Now there's going to be sanding, more sanding. I will take some super glue, some black super glue, and fill in some of these cracks. That may or may not video. Certainly not going to video all the sanding. That's really just too much. But this is all what it looks like. If you like this kind of content, please like, subscribe, comment below. What'd you like? What'd you not like? I appreciate it. And see you at the next one.